Welcome back, all my awesome scholars. It's Miss Rauscher coming back to you with Georgia's executive and judicial branches. So let's get started. The executive branch in Georgia is the largest branch of government in Georgia, and it is responsible for enforcing the laws. The governor is the head of the executive branch and is the chief executive officer of the state. In order to become governor, a person must have the qualifications that are below. Firstly, he or she must be 30 years of age or older. They must have been a U.S. resident for at least 15 years, and then also been a Georgia resident for at least 6 years. Any candidate who meets these qualifications can run for office. If she or he wins the popular vote, which is 50% plus 1, they will serve a 4-year term. Governors can only serve 2 4-year terms in a row. The executive branch has specific duties which are outlined in the state constitution. The governor has what are called formal duties, and there are also some informal duties, but right now we're going to focus on the formal duties. Firstly, it is the duty of the governor to enforce laws, to appoint people to state offices, to propose and direct the state budget, and to suggest new state programs and laws that she or he would like the General Assembly to create. The governor can call special sessions of the legislature, which is the General Assembly. The governor can veto bills. And lastly, the governor is the commander-in-chief of the Georgia National Guard. There's also in our state what is called the lieutenant governor. The lieutenant governor is similar to what a vice president is for our federal government. Our lieutenant governor is the second highest ranking member of the executive branch. She or he must meet the same qualifications as the governor because they may have to take over if the governor is unable to serve. And also, our lieutenant governor is elected separately from the governor for a 4-year term, but there is no limit to the number of times that a lieutenant governor may serve. So again, the lieutenant governor is the second highest ranking member of the executive branch. And let me draw your attention right here. Since the lieutenant governor is elected differently than the governor, then the lieutenant governor could be from a different political party than the governor. Another one of the duties of the lieutenant governor is that she or he is what is called the president of the Senate. They are the ones that direct what happens in the Senate while the Senate meets. The president of the Senate assigns senators to committees and then directs the sessions or the meetings. The lieutenant governor is also responsible for any of the duties or the actions the governor may assign. Another part of our executive branch are our state agencies. State agencies oversee departments to help state programs run smoothly. The people that make up, or the agencies that make up the part of the executive branch are the Secretary of State, the State Attorney General, the Commissioner of Agriculture, the Commissioner of Labor, the Commissioner of Insurance, and the State School Superintendent. The heads of these departments are elected by the citizens of Georgia at the same time as the governor, and they serve the same number of terms. There are also state departments that are part of our executive branch. They focus on major policy areas. The governor appoints the heads of state departments, but they must be approved by the state Senate. So our state departments include the State Department of Education, the Department of Human Resources, the Department of Public Safety, the Department of Transportation, the Department of Economic Development, and the Department of Natural Resources. All of those together make up our state's executive branch. And again, remember, the executive branch in Georgia is the largest branch of government in the state. Now, let's discuss Georgia's judicial branch. The judicial branch is made up of the state's courts, and it is the job of this branch to interpret the state's laws. Laws must be applied properly and not violate rights granted in the U.S. Constitution. In Georgia, there are 2 types of courts. You have your trial courts, and you have the appellate courts. Georgia's courts are organized into 7 levels. So you have 2 appellate court levels, and then at the trial level, there are 5 courts. So what are appellate courts? Appellate courts do not hear any new testimony. The appellate courts only look over decisions made in lower courts to make sure that the trials were fair and that the trial did not violate the rights that were granted to the defendant by the Constitution. Appellate courts can either uphold the decision made by the lower court, which means whatever was decided remains, or they can send the case back to the lower court to be retried. In our state, there are two, appellate courts. First, and the highest court in Georgia is the state Supreme Court. There are 7 justices who are judges who are elected to serve 6-year terms. The state Supreme Court hears cases that will determine the constitutionality of a law. So if the General Assembly passes a law and a citizen thinks that the new law violates one of their rights, they could bring that case to the state Supreme Court. They also hear election disputes. So if you recall in 2016, when there was a governor election, 2018, there was a dispute between the 2 major candidates, and the state Supreme Court made a ruling that allowed Brian Kemp to become our state governor. As well, any person that is sentenced or given the death penalty, the defendant has a right for the state Supreme Court to look at their case to make sure that the case was handled appropriately. And then there are several other types of cases that can be sent to the state Supreme Court. But typically, before an appeal gets to the state Supreme Court, it had to have gone through the State Court of Appeals first. The State Court of Appeals is the second highest court in Georgia, and there are 12 justices who are selected, and they work in teams of 3 to review cases. So as I said before, most cases have to go through the Court of Appeals, the state appellate court, before they can be referred to the state Supreme Court. Then we have our trial courts. Trial courts measure citizens' actions against the law. So cases can be presented either to only a judge or to a jury. There are 5 trial level courts in our state. You have the superior courts. There are 49 spread throughout the state. They are going to handle or have jurisdiction over most civil or criminal cases and all felonies. So let's take a moment to look at some of the vocabulary associated with this. If you look over here to the right, there are 2 types of law. You have civil and criminal law. Civil law is a disagreement between 2 or more people. Criminal law is when a law has been broken. So an example of civil law is where you might see on Judge Judy, where 2 people have a disagreement and they take it to court, and it usually results in either someone paying a fine or paying another person, or the case can be dismissed. In criminal courts, that's where an actual trial has been seen, or an actual law has been broken, and you might have seen that on shows such as Law and Order SVU, The First 48, or any numerous other shows that involve criminal behavior. Some of the other legal terms are jurisdiction. So like I just mentioned, jurisdiction gives the power, right, or authority to interpret and apply the law. And then we have a felony versus a misdemeanor. Now, a felony is a very serious crime, and that crime is punishable by more than 1 year in jail and more than $1,000 fine. Misdemeanors, on the other hand, are less serious crimes, and they're punishable by less than a year in jail and less than $1,000 crime. So now let's go back over to the 5 trial level courts, and we'll talk about each of those again. So again, the Superior Court has jurisdiction over most civil or criminal cases, and all felonies are heard in the Superior Court. Next, we have the state courts, and there are 72 of those spread throughout the state. The state courts have jurisdiction over civil cases and misdemeanors. Then we have the juvenile courts. Each county has its own juvenile court, so there are 159 juvenile courts in the state. The juvenile courts have jurisdiction over delinquent children age 17 and under, and deprived children under the age of 18. We have your probate courts, and again, each county has a probate court, and the probate court has jurisdiction over wills, estates, and other contracts. And then lastly, we have our magistrate courts, and magistrate courts have jurisdiction on civil cases, including a judgment of less than $15,000. It also hears cases where people might have written bad checks, and it's also the magistrate court that issues warrants for a person's arrest. Here is a diagram that shows you the court system in Georgia. So again, the Supreme Court for the state is the highest court in our state, and then you have the State Court of Appeals, and we also have our Superior Court, and then there are the lower courts This one right here, municipal court. Municipal court and the word municipality is just another word for city. So there are 370 city courts or municipal courts throughout the state. This diagram shows you the difference between criminal law and civil law. So you can see criminal law might be an injury to the public, whereas a civil law is a private injury or wrong. Now, when we say injury, it doesn't mean that someone got hurt physically, but an injury is when a right has been violated. So that's what it means by injury. So you can take a moment to look through each of these different parts of civil law and criminal law. And then over here is another piece to describe the difference between civil law and criminal law. In a civil case, if a person is found liable or guilty, then the defendant usually has to compensate or pay the plaintiff. In criminal law, if found guilty, the accused can be incarcerated, which is a word for locked up, and fined. Please take a moment and look through each of the steps. All right, ladies and gentlemen, well, this time that will bring to a close your lesson on the branches of government in Georgia. Take care, stay safe, and see you soon.